Good intentions aren't enough. Using the same strategies and methods of people that did terrible things but claiming better intentions is not likely going to get you good results. I'm 44 hours into the 66-hour audiobook about Robert Modis when I noticed something. My city just approved funding for a huge loan for redevelopment of the West Side, including this huge stadium, for upwards of $130 million. And I realized that this is a legacy of this. Now, if you don't know who Robert Moses was, he was the Parks Commissioner of New York City, who is known for displacing up to 500,000 people during his projects and development of New York. That number is conservative in part because a lot of people sent their engineers and their planners to be educated by Robert Moses, and they brought those ideas back to their cities. And even looking at my city from the sky, if you pay attention, you'll realize it had inherited a legacy of displacement from Robert Moses. This is Interstate 24 that turns into Interstate 27. This is going north to south, separating east from west. And this is Interstate 24 on the south side of town, separating north from south. In both of these places, the interstate is used like a wall to separate public housing from the other parts of downtown. Again, this is the west and east side, public housing from the resources downtown. And even to this day, you can see the desire paths where there aren't proper walking paths of people coming to downtown to get resources they've been shut off from. In order to build this highway, they had to bulldoze neighborhoods like Cameron Hill and Hill City, and then East Chattanooga and Jefferson Heights and South Side on the south side of Chattanooga. We have to remember that regardless of his intentions, he was able to get a lot of stuff passed by buying into people's emotions, pointing out that what he was building was better for the public in general. In fact, urban renewal was seen as a sort of mercy to people who lived in slums. Now, if you've read Jane Jacobs, one of the few people who successfully stood up to Robert Moses, you'll learn that the term slums was thrown around very loosely, and the term blight really was a meaningless term. That yes, people were poor, but they had community and they got by, and their lives were far worse when they got removed from their quote-unquote slums into public housing. Now, where does a stadium and all this investment come in? I don't think the problem with this is that it is trying to further segregate or widen the gap between the haves and have-nots, although some people argue that's what's going to happen. I disagree with this because this is an attempt at knowing the future of our city and freezing it in time. Charles Marone from Strong Towns makes a point by showing this picture of his town in 1870 and then showing a picture of that same street but in the early 1900s. How do you get from this to this? What Marone points out is that you get there by incremental development. The same way desire paths first show up like this, and then later we might solidify them by pouring concrete, so towns start with a cluster of small and permanent wooden buildings. The value in towns is the proximity of people to other people and resources. Marone points out that when you watch expeditions that go out west, it starts with tents, and then the buildings get a little bit more solid, boardwalks come in, until eventually you have more permanent placings as the city proves itself. In the same way, with big developments, what we're guessing at is what the city's going to need in 50 years, and then we usually enact zoning laws that freeze that in time. But cities are living entities, ever-changing, like a coral reef. For a coral reef to stop growing and repurposing would be the coral reef's death. I don't see this development as a bad thing or that I hate baseball. I see this development as a bad thing because this isn't how wonderful cities are made. Incremental development leads to resilient, adaptable, financially solvent communities. But a lot of what we see in America is we build out housing and then we create zoning laws that keeps incremental development from happening. And then eventually the dam breaks and our needs become so great we have this sudden intensification, which is lifeless and without personality. In fact, if you hate Soviet bloc style housing and things like that, you hate sudden intensification, not incremental development. Value is derived from proximity, and where you see the most proximity in Chattanooga, you see the most profitability. And where you see the most spread outness of Chattanooga or the single family housing, that's where you see the debt of a city. Great cities can and will and do host sports teams, but a successful city is able to host a sports team in a financially solvent way. They don't become financially solvent by taking out loans to support these teams. And we can wax eloquent about the TIFs or the taxing models that don't raise taxes in order to afford this, but at the end of the day, we have crumbling roads and infrastructure, record high pedestrian and cyclist deaths, a housing market that is causing local organizations to take drastic measures and propose plans to help with the problems around our city. I just refuse to believe that $100+ million on a minor league sports stadium is the anchor that our culture needs right now. And in case you couldn't guess, the people most disproportionately affected by Robert Moses, the people that have been excluded from our towns, they weren't the white, rich, well-off people. And part of the issue that I take with this development is it's being pitched as this is going to help an under-resourced community. There's going to be increased resources and transit that's brought into this area through this development. And to me, it feels like you're holding those resources hostage in order to get this baseball stadium. Why not just allow those good things to take place, lower the barrier of entry for zoning so stuff can get built up in this area anyways, and see what gets built there? It probably wouldn't be a baseball stadium, but it probably would be what our community needs.